You can still type in questions and I can still go back and answer those. So let's talk about hoarding disorder first. And again, this is just going to be an overview in a brief nutshell. Hoarding disorder is a mental health issue. It is sometimes very difficult to understand that because unlike other mental health issues, if you don't struggle with hoarding disorder, the solution seems obvious. So, for example, if you're working with somebody who has schizophrenia, most of us wouldn't tell somebody with schizophrenia, stop hearing your voices, don't hear voices, don't be paranoid. We wouldn't say that because we know that that's not something that we experience, and even if we did, we know that we couldn't stop that. But in a hoarding situation, the solution to us seems very simple. It seems, just pick it up, just get rid of it. So sometimes it's hard to show that, or hard to understand how this is a mental health issue. But let's talk about the mental health piece of this. There's a couple things that we look for with hoarding disorder. The primary thing is extreme attachment, so that there's an inability or extreme difficulty in letting things go. So hoarding disorder is not necessarily indicative by the number or the amount of clutter in somebody's home. There can be a lot of clutter and somebody can let things go easily, or there can be a little bit of clutter and people are really attached. So just because there's a lot of clutter or a little clutter doesn't mean there is or isn't hoarding disorder. So with that extreme attachment, the next piece is because of that behavior, because of nothing going out and lots coming in, then the places in the home are unable to be used for their intended purpose. This does not mean that your dining room table is a mess, because if that's the case, you're probably a parent. This means that maybe you can't get to the kitchen, maybe you can't get to the sink, maybe you can't get to the refrigerator, you can't prepare food, maybe there's no place to sit in the home, there's no pathways, maybe you can't sleep in your bed, maybe you can't access the bathroom or the facilities in the home. That is what we're talking about. And then the third major thing that we look for is just the level of distress, the physical, the medical, the social, the emotional distress that the person is in. Now, that being said, you also have to understand that there's hoarding behavior, which there can be lots of clutter and people holding on to things, but it may be brought on by depression. It may be brought on by a traumatic brain injury. It may be brought on by dementia. It may be brought on by medical issues that make it difficult for somebody to move around and keep up with their housekeeping. There's also a difference between hoarding and squalor. Hoarding is more, the items in the home have a purpose for that person. Squalor is more environmental, so it looks like what it is, a lot of trash, a lot of sanitation issues, but the person in that situation does not have the attachment to those items, and those items have no purpose for them. Now, there can be hoarding, there can be squalor, and there can be a mixture of both. Sometimes squalor's mixed with hoarding because how do you get the trash out? How do you clean things up when you can't get through the home appropriately? So now, moving on from hoarding disorder, great to see you, Lucinda from Illinois. Who else? Honey, I've seen this come up a couple times. If anybody has any idea why she might not be able to view this, you can type it in there. And that's another note too. If you have questions, type them in. And also, if you see somebody with a question that you have some feedback on, you can go ahead and do that and interact with each other on this also. This is not just about me by any means. All right, so now that we've discussed what hoarding disorder is diagnostically, let's talk about another feature of hoarding disorder, and that is that the overwhelming majority, over 90% of people that struggle with hoarding disorder also struggle with some other type of mental health issue. This can be depression, which is the most significant one. Over 50% of people with hoarding disorder struggle with major depression. And think about what depression does. You know, the low self-esteem, low self-worth, low energy, low motivation, difficulty making decisions. And what makes what worse? Does the clutter make the hoarding worse, or does the hoarding make the clutter worse? Also, after depression, then a lot of people struggle, about 30% of people struggle with some type of anxiety issues. So the anxiety, and what does that do? Difficulty making decisions, getting overwhelmed easily, not being able to get started. For those of you that are clinicians or mental health professionals out there, anxiety and avoidance are the two words that go together. And for those of you that aren't, think about that. If you're anxious about something, when do you do it? We put it off and put it off. And think about this. Let's say that you're living your life, you're in a cluttered environment, there's probably some shame and embarrassment, you're worried about people finding out, you're struggling with this, and at the same time, somebody knocks on your door and says you've got 2 weeks. You've got to get this cleaned up, you've got to get all this stuff done, you've got to throw out your stuff, or you're getting kicked out of your home, or you're going to be, evicted. what does that do to your anxiety levels? If you don't have anxiety, what's happening? So again, I see that there are a couple people that are having trouble playing the video. I'm not quite sure. If there's other people having trouble, just go ahead and hit the like button right now so we can kind of see what's going on. It just may be where you're watching from. So again, talking about the other features of hoarding disorder, we've got depression, we've got anxiety, and then also, yes, there's an audio feed. Why don't we do this? Can everybody take a moment, and if you can hear me, press the like button, the thumbs up button. 1, 2, there we go, 2 people can hear. So I think if you're having difficulty, for those of you that were, just keep trying, and for some reason it might be your connection or where you're watching it at, and you can go back later and watch this part again. Thank you for all of you that are participating with that. Thank you. All right, so another piece of the mental health part is a lot of people with hoarding disorder struggle with ADHD. What does ADHD do? ADHD makes it so that you can't focus, right? You're overwhelmed easily. You're having difficulty, making decisions. So I heard somebody with ADHD once say that her brain incorporates options rather than eliminating options. Hello, Oklahoma. Nice to see you, Deb. So also with that piece, if you think about you're trying to make a decision on something, but all of a sudden, all these options start coming into your brain. Should I let this go? Well, what if I do? Well, should I do it this way? Should I do it that way? Who's going to take it? Is this the right time to let it go? Should my neighbor's going to see? If you're constantly plagued by all that, the difficulty in making a decision, how easy is it going to be to let things go? So now we've got the mental health piece, the diagnostic piece, the inability to let things go. We've got the fact that most people struggle with at least one, if not more, mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, ADHD, also OCD. Hoarding behavior is triggered by trauma and loss. So if you're experiencing some type of trauma, somebody can have hoarding behavior or hoarding disorder and it goes along chronic and progressive, and then they experience a loss or a trauma, and that escalates the behavior. Because the hoarding behavior is the coping mechanism. This is not about the stuff, it's about what's going on within the person. So now, in addition to the comorbid mental health issues, somebody with hoarding disorder also has a lot of issues with processing, so executive functioning. They've shown that the brain of somebody with hoarding disorder is very different from somebody without hoarding disorder, so that the frontal lobe is affected in a way where there's executive functioning issues. Again, difficulty making decisions, difficulty categorizing. So for a brief example, if we were working with somebody with hoarding disorder and wanted them to categorize 50 receipts, somebody with hoarding disorder is going to need 50 file folders because everything is unique, everything is different. So it's very difficult for them to be able to just say, oh, this is keep, this is save. Everything, again, is unique. So in talking about that, think again about the cases. And how many of you have worked cases that you believe were hoarding situations? And again, you can just respond by hitting the like or just typing it in that you have. If you've been to those cases, how many of you have heard the person say, I can do this on my own. I don't need your help. Most people do that. And a lot of people say, well, clearly they need help. But there's a couple things. Number one, none of us want somebody in our home, right? And if all of a sudden people are coming in our home, people that we don't know, telling us to get rid of our things, taking away the control, that is going to make us not want somebody to come in our home. But the other thing too is, most people that struggle with this and say, I can do it myself, absolutely believe that they can do it themselves. What they're not taking into consideration is the mental health issue, the processing issues. And so in not doing that, they're not understanding why they can't do it by themselves. I mean, why can't they? You can do it. I can do it. It makes sense. I worked with somebody once who actually told me, he said, I am so embarrassed right now to have you in my house helping me figure out how to throw away a piece of trash because I don't know what that is. So keeping in mind, when you're working with somebody in a hoarded situation, you have to remember that this is a person that is struggling with a really difficult mental health issue. This is a person that is having difficulty with the decision making, going through some trauma, loss. It's somebody that's really at their most vulnerable, especially for those of you, I see a lot of people with APS, with fire, with Board of Health. A lot of people, we're going in there as, we're telling people what they need to do and to get things done. And that type of stress and pressure is going to make it very difficult for somebody to actually want and accept help. So also I want to stress, one of the things I want to stress, and those of you that are helping out with these issues, thanks so much. Greg, thanks for doing that. Hello, Christy from Miami. What I want to stress too is we're really trying to get away from using the word hoarders. You know, hoarding disorder is in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, so it is a diagnosis. We're not getting away from that word hoarding or hoarding disorder, but to call somebody a hoarder, that kind of refers to the TV shows. That's what people imagine. And again, the TV shows, that's how I got started in this. And with the TV shows also, I mean, that's why there's so much awareness because of the TV shows. That's why more people are reaching out. That's why there's more training. There's more of us that are specialists doing this. But the difficulty is because the TV show shows the worst crisis situations with a lot of squalor, and it's drama. It's a TV show. Then people relate hoarding with that. Most of the people I work with do not have homes that are unsanitary. Most of the people I work with have homes that are clean as much as they can, that are relatively neat. It's just a lot of stuff. So that is one thing I want to stress, is trying to get away from using that word hoarder or referring to somebody as a hoarder. So now, for those of you that are participating, again, this is great that you're letting me know where you're from. Let me know if there's a couple people, how many people are gathered to watch. And then also, if you have any questions as we go, this is a discussion, a question and answer. I am going to go over some of the basics so that we can all get on the same page, because again, the great thing about doing something live like this is getting so many people involved. So we're all working on the same page. One of the goals here of the Clutter Movement is to help individuals, families, and professionals all be on the same page about this. So we're not all working this from different angles and different perspectives. We're all working it with the same tools, the same understanding. All right, so if you have any questions at this point, go ahead and ask them. And what I'm going to do is actually start on, I have my notes right here so that I stay within the hour. I know everybody's working and doesn't want to get overdone with this. So again, moving forward to the next part, we're going to talk about harm reduction. So harm reduction is an approach that was initially about, hi Jim, great to see you, and Kathy. See, here's my ADHD right here. This is not a great environment for somebody with ADHD, right? So anyways, the harm reduction approach, it is ideal, or actually it started with the clean needle exchange. So where, it's better to give somebody a clean needle that's doing drugs rather than to have them using dirty needles and getting, diseases and things like that. Great. Karen, 8 people with Ames Council on Aging. Great to see you. Southeast Tennessee, 6 people watching. Great to see you all too. So thinking about that, if you're trying to just reduce the risk, that's going to be sometimes the best approach. So hoarding disorder, as you all know, it is a really ingrained mental health issue. So yes, great timing on that question, Barbara. Do most hoarders need mental health intervention? Absolutely yes. The trick is, or the difficulty is, number one, most places have no access to anybody that is trained to do the mental health intervention. The other piece is most people with hoarding disorder do not self-report. They are discovered. So how many people out there in agencies right now, like the Adult Protective Services that are on here right now, have people that just show up and say, hey, I need help? How many of you actually have people that are discovered? And you can just do that by hitting the likes. So if somebody's actually discovered, they're usually not likely. Wow, 10 people in Louisville, Kentucky. Thank you, Barbara. Great to see you all. So they're usually not, they don't have insight and they don't have the motivation to actually make change. So how do you implement mental health intervention in that situation? Because they're going to say, I don't have a problem. So the harm reduction approach is ideal for this. It's the best pragmatic or practical approach. It's not the absolute answer. So a lot of times when I talk about harm reduction, everybody gives me, well, there's this scenario and there's that. Well, there's always that scenario where nothing is going to work. But this is the best approach that's been developed. Dr. Michael Tompkins is one of the experts on hoarding disorder and the harm reduction approach. And this is the best approach we have found to be able to work with people with insight, without insight, people in crisis, people out of crisis, people that are just overwhelmed and don't know where to start. So with harm reduction, I want to back up just a second to say this. The best way I can describe a hoarding disorder, and for those of you that have heard me speak before, you've heard me say this probably ad nauseum, but the best way I can describe it is like an iceberg. With an iceberg, we see about 10% of it above the water. What's below the water sank the Titanic. So if you took the top of the iceberg off, where would the Titanic be today? And everybody responds, right? At the bottom of the ocean because of the underlying issues. So if you don't deal with underlying issues, you're not going to resolve the hoarding problem. If you just take away the clutter, like doing full cleanouts, we strongly advise against those. However, we do understand that sometimes there are situations where there's no other alternative. They have to be done. But think about a full cleanout. What did I say a little while ago triggers hoarding behavior? Trauma and loss. So if somebody has all of their items removed from their home, you have now created a significant loss and caused them trauma. And what is the reaction going to be to that? Increased hoarding behavior at a faster rate. Think about this too. If you clean up a home or take away the clutter without the person's involvement and without the person being involved with, if it's a professional organizer that specializes in hoarding, mental health, or somebody that can work with them on that, you haven't taught them any new skills, any new strategies. You just put them in a nice, clean place, and now what's going to happen? If somebody has lived in a hoarding situation for years and years, they're not used to being able to keep up with those daily tasks. So the hoarding behavior is going to continue. So again, talking about harm reduction, it is about safety first. Beyond that, it's not our business. However, when we do collaborative or when I work with towns and agencies collaboratively to resolve cases, we strongly encourage the person to get help so that past the crisis, they are learning skills and strategies to manage and maintain the progress that they have made. So in that though, if they're not doing that, what we try to do is just work on the safety issues. One thing I like to say this too, how many people have watched The Wizard of Oz? You can hit like if you have, and everybody should say, yes, I watched The Wizard of Oz. So if you've watched The Wizard of Oz, what I always say is this: going into a hoarded home is overwhelming. Even if you know what you're doing, even if you've been in there before, each case is so different that it can get completely overwhelming. Great, lots of people who watch The Wizard of Oz. It can get completely overwhelming. And so what we want to make sure is that when we're going in the home, number one, we're recognize the person. I'm talking to the person, I'm recognizing that they are an individual who's gone through a lot. This was not their dream to live in a hoarded home. If you went back 20, 30 years ago and showed them a picture of their life right now, that would not be their goal. So keep in mind that we are working with a human being. Also though, when we go into a home, most of the homes that I work in, even when we're done, when the crisis is over, this is not a situation that I would live in, right? We all do that. However, it's none of our business. We want safety, we want functionality, and again, beyond that, it's none of our business. So speaking of The Wizard of Oz, I didn't completely forget. We want people to live in Oz, right? Oz is clean, Oz is shiny, rainbow-colored horses or unicorns. Maybe their horses running all around. Who wouldn't want to live there? Dorothy didn't want to live there. She wanted to live in Kansas, right? And if you've seen me talk before, we talk about what Kansas was, dusty, and there's, dysfunctional family issues, and there's tornadoes, and there's no Technicolor in Kansas. Why would she want to live there? It's because there's no place like home. So again, we have to respect that. We are in there to help with safety. We're in there to help with functionality. And beyond that, it's none of our business. So now talking again about harm reduction, and again, if you have any questions, please type them in there. I'm happy to answer them. If I don't get to them all, again, I can get to them later on after this event is over. I'm trying to cram so much into this. I hope I'm not overwhelming people, but there may be more questions afterwards than there are right now. So in also talking about the harm reduction approach, a lot of times when I work with somebody, their biggest fear is that somebody's going to come in and take all my stuff. They're going to tell me what to do with my son's things. They're going to tell me what to do with my parents' things. And, they passed away and I was their caretaker. And that's what we want to get across to people, is that we're not there to tell them what they need to keep and what they need to get rid of. It's their choice. We are just there to make the home safe. We're not in charge of what they're going to get rid of. So I've worked on cases where somebody was told to get rid of all their books. This was a Harvard professor and told to get rid of all his books. I've been in cases where they were told to get rid of 80% of their stuff. Is it safe after 80%? Who knows? So what we want to do is find an objective way to be able to manage this with the harm reduction approach. So talking about harm reduction, how many of you have, especially I'm going to pull on all of you from APS out there. So all of you from APS, there's Lancaster County, Virginia, Adult Protective Services, good to have you. How many of you, by a show of thumbs or likes, have gone to a home and somebody turns you down, doesn't want you there? Think about that. Again, with Adult Protective Service and a lot of agencies, there are limitations to what you can do. They'll self-determination. If they don't want you in there, you can't go in there. A lot of people don't understand that and get frustrated. But again, here's one of the things about harm reduction that makes it easier to get in the door. Instead of going in and saying something like, you need to get rid of all this stuff. There's too much trash here. You got to get rid of the trash. Why is the dog food? Why isn't the cat cleaned up after? Why are all these boxes here? Instead of doing that, an example of what I would do is to go in and say, I notice when I'm coming in the front door, I can't get it open all the way, and I'm really concerned about your safety. What can I do to help you make this safe? I have not talked at all about their stuff. I have not made any judgments about what they're keeping. And again, as I said earlier, there's no 100% absolute strategy that works, but harm reduction is the best option that we have and the most successful option that we have. So in working through that, sometimes the math doesn't add up. You think, well, how are we not going to get rid of things and just try to make a pathway when everything is piled up? True, sometimes the math doesn't add up, but it's a process of getting started. Harm reduction isn't treatment. So going in that way, if you're going in and somebody's thinking that you're saying that they have hoarding disorder or they're a hoarder, they're going to think that you want them to go with the therapy. Now, do we want them to do that? Absolutely. But if they're not open to that and we're pushing that, they're not going to want to accept help. And a lot of times they don't want help because somebody's already done that. Somebody's been pushing them to get mental health assistance and they don't feel like they need it. So the harm reduction approach, again, is not treatment. We're not going to talk to them about underlying issues. We're not going to talk to them about, getting rid of, their family's heirlooms or something like that. We're just going to talk about safety. So again, if you have any questions, it's great. If nobody seems to have questions, that's either good or bad. I'm not sure yet. That's the great content. Yes, thank you. Anyway, so let's go ahead and move on to how we assess harm reduction. So let me give you a little bit of background on myself. And for those of you that are just joining, my clock is over there, so I'm just trying to make sure that I get you out of here by 2 o'clock Central Standard Time. So I started doing this work in 2011. I went back to school as a mature student. I was going to get my psychology degree. Somebody about 2 weeks before I registered for the psychology program at Salem State University told me you need to get your master's in social work. You can do the same work sooner and be more marketable. I said, okay, fine. I didn't want to be a social worker because at that time, all I thought social workers did was, with welfare benefits and child protective services. However, I went to get my social work degree. One of the internships that I had to do in my bachelor's program, I had to pick what I was going to do. In the meantime, I was watching the TV shows. And I have to say, a lot of people have some feelings, good, bad, or indifferent about the TV shows. I was watching them from a lens or a perspective of, this is really intriguing disorder. I want to know more about this. So when I was going into agency day, where agencies are there to pick out interns or get interns to come work for them, I was going to go to drug court or something. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And as I walked in the door, literally, I had my Oprah aha moment. Somebody on the right side was talking about hoarding, and that literally changed the trajectory of everything that I was doing. So I've been doing this work for 2 years, 2011, 2012, and half of 13 as an intern myself, and then started the North Shore Center for Hoarding and Cluttering in Danvers, Massachusetts, working with support groups and doing things like that. And in doing that, I want to say that, there is so much out there to be able to help people. But what we're trying to do now, going kind of back to that harm reduction piece, is hoarding disorder, 3 to 5% of the population, and we think that's an underestimate because, again, most people don't self-report. So if there's that many people and they have family members affected, and now all these agencies, like everybody here attending, are involved, how many millions of people are affected by this? And no matter how hard we try to educate and train and get out there and do things, it's virtually impossible to keep up with that. So the purpose of getting this information out about the harm reduction is to be able to get everybody on the same page. I really appreciate, I want to do a shout out to Franklin, Tennessee. If anybody here from Franklin, I know you're there. Thumbs up or hearts. Hearts would be great, but that's not necessary. Franklin, Tennessee, again, Tennessee has very few resources. And so the town of Franklin has taken it upon themselves to get educated as a group rather than just educating one department at a time. Because in doing that, we're still kind of all on different pages. So again, going into the harm reduction approach, I'm going to talk just in a moment about the uniform inspection checklist. How many people have that available right now by a show of thumbs? I keep wanting to say hands. By a show of thumbs up, how many people have the uniform inspection checklist in front of you? And if you've ever used it, if you have a brief comment about it, feedback, good, bad, indifferent, whatever, let me know about that. So when I was starting this work, see, I finally got back to my point. When I started this work, I started doing a lot of crisis case management. And that's another issue where that's just a resource that's not around a lot. So doing the crisis case management, a typical case would be reported. Somebody has failed their inspection. They're about to get evicted from their home. And they would call where I was working and say, we need help. So I'd go in, I'd get a copy of the inspection report, and the person had failed clearly for safety reasons. Thank you to whoever said you love the UIC, Uniform Inspection Checklist. Failed for safety reasons, but the comments were always too much clutter, too much stuff throughout, needs to organize, clutter throughout. So a lot of really subjective information put on there. And again, I understand because as inspectors going in, this is overwhelming. You know it's a mental health issue. What do you say, right? So for those of you who just asked where you get the checklist, if you go to thecluttermovement.com, you can register for free. And once you do that free registration, it will send you a link to the most up-to-date uniform inspection checklist. And there's also going to be a link there that later on, after this event, you'll be able to visit this, re-see this on YouTube, and you can send it out to colleagues and watch it again. So again, going with the uniform inspection checklist, what was happening is I was going in, too much clutter, clutter throughout. How do you resolve that? I mean, what do you do to resolve clutter? I'm not Board of Health. I'm really, really advocating about people staying in their own lanes, even when we work in collaborative cases. I don't want to do the fire department's job. I don't know how to do it, and they do. They're an expert. I don't want to do housing's job. I want to trust that that person I'm working with is the expert. So when somebody says there's too much clutter throughout, they need to fix it, what do? I could do my best to do, safety issues, but at the same time, I don't know what the other person is really looking for. So what I would have to do is kind of track down the inspector, say, what exactly do you want? One specific case I worked on, they gave me a list of 5 things. 3 of them were safety issues, 2 of them were not. However, I thought it was important to do all 5 because the person was a long-standing issue. Every year, at inspection, this person came up, this person came up. So we did all 5 things on that list. And again, that was literally a handwritten list from property management. So once we got to the point where we had actually met those targets, we had them come in and do an inspection. And as a side note, I want to say it's really important when you do collaborative work to schedule regular inspections with the resident, with somebody that is seen to be on their side, like somebody like myself, social worker, case management, and then also with whoever the inspection agency is. It's important to schedule those because you want to make sure you're doing the work and getting it done in a timely and reasonable manner, but you also need that leverage. If the person that is inspecting doesn't want to participate because the person's getting help, now there's no leverage. So going back to being able to do this, and that person that gave me the list of 5 things, we got it done, they came in, did the inspection, were really positive towards the resident saying, you did a great job, this is phenomenal. And as the property manager walked out the door, they said, now you need to really deal with all those pillows on your bed. So my question was, what does pillows, I'm not sure what pillows have to do with anything, but again, it was a subjective issue because hoarding disorder is overwhelming. And even if you are a specialist in this, if you see hoarding cases, you may have in your mind what you want to do and you walk in, it's like, I don't even know what to do. The other issue that we have is, how many towns are on here? Again, here's somebody in Kansas, we've got people all across the United States. Everybody's codes are different. Every inspection has different things. I've had people pass one inspection and then fail their next inspection. It's very difficult to be able to manage, what's going to work here, what's going to work here. So as I was doing that, I started to realize something has to be done. There's got to be some way to have some minimum safety sanitation standards that everybody can agree on in order to move forward. So I worked on and started developing the uniform inspection checklist. In order to develop this, we pulled in our task force. So we had people, anybody that would be involved in a hoarding cases. So again, for those of you who are there, if you haven't let us know what agency you're from, because it's great to see how many different agencies actually get involved in a hoarding case, because hoarding cases are so different, so unique, that there's so many agencies involved. So with our task force, we had inspectors, we had property management, we had Board of Health. I mean, everybody you could think of, including people that struggle with hoarding disorder themselves. We all got together and we said, okay, what are the minimum safety and sanitation standards? So hypothetically, if one person said, well, I need a 36-inch pathway, and another person said, well, I need a 40, and somebody else said, I need a 44-inch pathway, we put on the checklist 36 inches. So that way, no matter who you're dealing with, no matter if they're at a private home, if they're in a condo, if they're in subsidized housing, if they're in an apartment complex, it doesn't matter. We've got those basics. So in doing that, the next thing that we did once we established that is we turned the checklist over to people that struggle with hoarding disorder. Because a lot of times there's people that think, we have the answer. And yes, I mean, we do. I mean, people that have been trained, people that are, doing the research and things, we do have the answer to, how best to approach this. But if we are not struggling with this issue ourselves, it can be very difficult to understand how exactly to manage this. And if something we develop, how do we know if it's going to work if we don't struggle with that same issue? So the uniform inspection checklist was put out there to people who actually have failed inspection, have had difficulty with inspections. And we put it out there, and the response from them was that it had to be very concrete, very specific, because if you're overwhelmed and you don't know where to start, you have to have something that's concrete and specific to follow. So now, if there's any questions, again, some people are still looking for the uniform inspection checklist. If you go to thecluttermovement.com, we've got that up now. So it's a free registration, and it's just so that through the links that you get through email, through that registration, you'll always have access to the most up-to-date uniform inspection checklist. Because anytime we make changes, it was getting hard having to email it out to everybody. I do want to say that we have gotten it so uniform at this point that I have not made changes in quite a while, I think a couple years, other than last week, 2 weeks ago, I did make some changes because Australia is now using it. So we did make some changes. I had to change things to the metric system there, which thank goodness for Google. So again, the uniform inspection checklist, you can get it on the site. All right, so any questions at this point? Everybody's being really nice and silent. But anyways, if you have questions, let me know. If they come up later, you can go back to this on Facebook and you can actually type in the questions and I can get back to you. So how many people have the uniform inspection checklist in front of you right now? Show of thumbs up. I'm going to hold it up to the screen. I'm pretty sure it doesn't turn out backwards. I'm going to try to hold it really, really still. So hold on. I have somebody asking me questions that I can't see the full question. So there we go. So with the checklist, here is the picture of it, first of all. All right, so the uniform inspection checklist. Remember what I was saying in the past couple of minutes about the difficulty in managing cases, because everybody's expectations are different. Every town, every state, if it's property management, if it's Board of Health, everybody's expectations are different. What the uniform checklist does, the uniform inspection checklist does, is make sure that we are able to all get on the same page, that we can all agree on what the minimum safety and sanitation standards are to assess a case. So with the checklist, the cost of dealing, yes, Jim, remind me later to talk about the cost, okay? The cost, right? We always hope nobody talks about the cost because that's one of the big barriers to hoarding disorder and hoarding issues also. So the uniform inspection checklist, the way we use it now is that we use it for an initial assessment. So how many of you are familiar with the clutter image rating? This is something that can be Googled. So the clutter image rating is it's a form that has 9 pictures on it. It's got, the first picture, there's very little clutter. The last picture, it's up to the ceiling. That is the first basic assessment that we use just to determine the volume. It's not a diagnostic tool. It's not a tool that we use to start planning. However, it is something that we use just for an initial assessment. So I'm reading a question, hold on. 30 days to make repairs. So, Erin, you asked me a good question. A lot of people wonder, how long do you have to correct things? Here's the thing. There's codes and rules and regulations that have to be followed. What I have found is that if everybody on the team is on the same page, there's ways to be able to not work around that, but be able to reasonably extend some of that if there's a good solid plan that's moving forward to make progress. And that's what we use the inspection checklist for. So part of that is actually being able to, negotiate. And when I first started doing this, people didn't want to sit in a team meeting and say, okay, I'll give you a month to get that front door out of the, clear. However, with a solid plan in place and those regular inspections by the team, not just by the inspection agency, we've been able to get people to get more time to be able to complete things. So again, it's a regulation. Some people will say something has to be done right away. But if they see progress, we're able to get extra time. I've been in court cases where it was hopeless. Who is it there that's from Greater Boston Legal Services? I can't remember your name, but I know you're on here. I've worked with Greater Boston Legal Services on a couple cases where there was nothing else that could be done. But because we were able to get the checklist in there and start following through with a plan, then we got more time to be able to do things. So let's go back to the checklist. So the first and primary use for the uniform inspection checklist, after, the clutter image rating has been used to kind of assess the volume so we all know what we're walking into, then the next assessment that we're using is the uniform inspection checklist. So hoarding cases, can anybody guess how many people this takes to manage hoarding cases? How many people are involved? Just throw some numbers out there. Is it one person? Can one person manage a case? No. Two people, difficult, but most of the time, most of you that are watching, like Adult Protective Services and all these town agencies, there's a lot of people involved with this. So how do you get everybody on the same page? Like I said, I've had cases that have told me, 80% of the stuff has to go. Well, what is that? How do I do that? I don't know what the fire regulations are. I don't know what the building inspector's regulations are. So again, being able to use the uniform inspection checklist to get everybody on the same page. In case somebody's about to ask this, yes, initially it can be tough because everybody has their own forms they use and we're not asking people to change forms. But when there's a hoarding case, refer to this as far as assessing and getting everybody on the same page. So with the uniform inspection checklist, if you look at it, we made it as simple as possible. I do want to point out a couple things. On the top of each section, as you can see, this goes through the harm reduction approach. So the harm reduction approach is, again, safety issues first. We want to make sure that the home is safe. So we're going to do harm reduction first. The second piece we're going to use is the primary inspection target. And then at the bottom, also just the general safety. And these are all things that have come up on every type of inspection that I've ever used. Now, I do want to say too, I pretty much have this form memorized. I still, when I go into a home to do this assessment, I take it out. I use it. I include the resident with it to talk through it. And I do that because we get overwhelmed. It's so easy to look up and see everything going on that we forget that we really need to be objective and pinpoint what is going on. So in going through the home, one of the things I wanted to point out is that you'll notice that we list on here what the definition of unobstructed, and then the next section, the definition of accessible is. I have been told that that seems a bit condescending to do that. I just want to let everybody know that the people that were on our peer advisory committee that actually struggle with hoarding disorder suggested that we do that. Again, so that things are very clear, concise, and concrete. So when walking into a home, and I know Facebook Live is getting to where you can actually do some screen shares and things, but at this point I can't do that. But if you think of a home when you walk into it, looking at this list first and saying, okay, I need to check for egresses first. Then I want to check for pathways. In using the form, you can just check off, okay, egresses, if it's a fail, mark fail, and then on the right-hand side of the form over to, yes, the right-hand side of the form, you can actually write in or type in the specific area. So rather than just saying it's just pathways, I have a home that I'm working in now where it's just a pathway from the bedroom to the bathroom. The other pathways are fine. So you're able to be really specific so that when you start to make a plan, we have clear-cut, small, reasonable, and objective goals. Now, going through this, you might go into somebody's home and the first 3, 4 things of the whole top section they might pass, and that's great. But as you keep moving down this, again, you're able to get to everything that has to do with sanitation and safety issues that would apply to anybody's code: fire, police, Board of Health, public health, adult protective services, any of those. So the other thing, again, this is a great tool for professionals. Now, that being said, it is also a really great tool to use for individuals and to use for family members. So a lot of the times when somebody, again, is in a hoarded situation, they don't know where to start. I mean, think about the mental health issues we talked about, depression, anxiety, the processing issues, ADHD, difficulty categorizing, being overwhelmed, not knowing where to start. This checklist works really, really well in the hands of the resident. There was actually a housing authority up in Massachusetts that took this and started including it with their lease, because even if you don't live in a hoarded home, you still need egresses, you still need pathways, you still need to be able to get to one of a window and have it unobstructed. So using this, it doesn't talk about the person's clutter. It's just a clear, concise set of kind of rules or guidelines for somebody to follow. So if you put it in the hands of somebody that is struggling with this, if you're doing a crisis case management situation, absolutely share it with them too, because you want to make sure that this is person focused, or make sure that it is, the individual is part of the team. They need to have a say in this. They need to know what's going on with this too. So as I said, when I fill this out, I actually go with the resident. As long as they're willing to go with me through the home, I will go with them and talk to them about these issues and kind of see what their thoughts are about it. So the other thing is if somebody is on that team, crisis case management, they're in, it's the resident, yes, it's very good in their hands to help them also. But if you're in a situation where somebody's not accepting help, and again, thumbs up for how many people have cases where people just don't want help, you can also give this to somebody and just say, here's some safety guidelines for you to follow. Because if they're overwhelmed, I had somebody once left me a voicemail at 4 o'clock in the morning and said that she had been up for 48 hours. And at the current time when she called and left that message, she was sorting safety pins. Because, she had a pathway that was not clear, but she went to what she could do because everything else was just too overwhelming. If you have somebody in a home that's not highly cluttered, let's say it's safe for the most part, they can still go through this and use it as a step-by-step process. Additionally, getting it in the hands of family members is very helpful too. Because again, with family, most of you know, relationships with somebody who's struggling with hoarding disorder and their family is very contentious, to say the least. Fights have been happening over the clutter. Everybody just talks and yells about the clutter. So being able for everybody to be on the same page and say, let's just do the harm reduction, can be very, very powerful. Again, it's about getting everybody on the same page with this. So I want to also tell you kind of a brief example of how this works. Now, this checklist, the one that everybody's able to download, is the Uniform Inspection Checklist Quick Reference. Again, for all of those that are watching, please get it. Send it out to anybody. It does say copyright at the bottom. You have my permission to send it out to whoever you want to. This is important to get everybody on the same page. That's the best way to be able to make progress with this, so that we're not all trying to work against each other and nobody has a good understanding of what the other person is doing. So with that though, the reason it's called Quick Reference is because there's actually a 3-page form that is legal document size that actually has the clutter image rating on that. How many people have actually seen that and used that? That was the initial form of the Uniform Inspection Checklist. I still use that today, but I use it once the case has started. I use it in the resolution process. I use it so when we do inspections, we use that long form every single inspection so we can measure and monitor progress. This form is a quick reference. It's great for assessing and planning, but it's not a real good way to manage and monitor the case. So with that long form, I totally lost my train of thought. So who's out there that knows me well enough that I lose? Karen, tell me where I'm at here. So the quick reference, again, we have that long form. The long form is, again, more detailed. It's the same stuff that's on here, but it just goes room by room. Again, I wouldn't suggest looking it up at this point because there's really no need to do that. So in the development of this and using this checklist, again, just really helpful. Now I found my thought. It's about how this works. The long form. When I first actually launched it, we launched it at the Massachusetts Statewide Steering Committee on Hoarding. And at the meeting when we launched it, we had a couple of the peer advisory committee that have been able, Greg, thank you for saying you often leave it with them. Great. So the peer advisory committee came with me too to help launch this at the steering committee. And after that meeting, I got a call a couple weeks later from somebody who was on part of the Board of Health. And they said that at that meeting, they were getting ready to send out a letter of condemnation of a home to somebody that they had worked with for years. I mean, the town had really bent over backwards to try to help this person. The person was in a private home. They had been out there, they'd put a dumpster out there, they'd gotten volunteers to go help, they tried to send people in, they did everything they could do to keep this person in their home, because that is the most important thing, is to keep people in their home. And I also, I'm going to write myself a note so I don't forget to talk about something. I also, again, the important thing, keep people in their home. So what he did is when he left our meeting, where we launched the 3-page form, we hadn't done the quick reference at that point, he went ahead and sent it out to this person. He sent the letter that said basically, in 10 days, we're coming to do an inspection. And if you don't pass inspection this time, your home is going to be condemned. He then folded up that long, legal size 3-page, uniform inspection checklist, folded it up, no explanation, and sent it with that. He went to the home in 10 days to do the inspection, and the person passed inspection. Now, was it house beautiful? Absolutely not. But the person passed inspection. So he asked the resident, he goes, what made the difference this time? And the resident said, you told me what to do. So again, think about that. Think about the fact that, we're going into somebody's home, struggling with hoarding disorder, struggling with the other mental health issues, the processing issues. A lot of times we're dealing with elders who have never been in trouble in their life, and all of a sudden they're being threatened with eviction. Where do they start? They don't know what to do. They think that, well, I need to clean up the kitchen, but they're not sure either. So being able to put this in the hands of the resident, family members, and also those of us that are professionals that are going out there and trying to help resolve these cases is extremely, extremely important. So again, I want to mention the link. A couple of people have asked about that. You can go to thecluttermovement.com. There's a place that's just free registration. And the reason we ask you to register is because we want you to have access to the most up-to-date forms that we have. By doing it that way, I was doing it old school up until a couple of days ago, which is just emailing out all the updates, which is really annoying for all of you, I'm absolutely sure. So by doing this, if I change anything, again, you'll get the most updated form at the Clutter Movement. Just register and that will send an email to you. And also, like I said earlier, we haven't had to change it in about 3 or 4 years maybe, because we've gotten it to the point where it's a completely standardized and uniform. And for those of you that might have missed, I got a note from Australia 2 weeks ago. They're using it in their training now. And we only had to change the metric system or the measurements on that. So one of the things that I want to talk about for about 2 minutes, and then we'll see if there's any other questions. I say 2 minutes, but for those of you that know me, it might be a little longer, is this reasonable accommodation. So it's not, I don't want to say it's easy, but when you're in a situation where somebody's not in a court situation already, where it's like threat of eviction, it hasn't gone to court yet, or they've just failed an inspection, putting together a plan and a team and being able to negotiate timeframes and reasonable timeframes. Again, with a good solid plan and everybody on the same page, it's getting easier and easier to do this. If you've got somebody in the court system, how many people are on here that work in the courts? Massachusetts has the advantage. I don't know how many other states have housing court. So being in Tennessee, I'm used to the Massachusetts housing court, which does not exist here. So, what we used to do is, somebody goes in, gets reasonable accommodations. Reasonable accommodations means that if you have a disability, then reasonable accommodations must be made for you to be able to rectify whatever situation is jeopardizing your housing. So with hoarding, it's reasonable accommodation is, some reasonable time and a plan to be able to rectify this. The difficulty is what I used to see in the court papers the most, or in the, if it was a mediation, is that they would say with reasonable accommodation, noticeable change needs to occur by, and it was usually 30 days. How many people have seen those notices? Now, let me ask you this. if you're somebody with hoarding disorder, what does noticeable change mean? Does it mean the same thing that it means to the person that's on the Board of Health or housing or code enforcement? I do believe there are the people from code enforcement here, so hopefully they'll be able to respond to you. But again, it doesn't mean the same thing. I had one case that I worked on where the person was eventually evicted because her version of and what she perceived as noticeable change was just getting the top layer of Kleenex out of the entire house, which covered the entire house. But what noticeable change for the landlord meant is I need to be able to get in the front door. This is a safety hazard. So again, being able to get this into any reasonable accommodations also, for those of you, I think in adult protective services, that's usually where this happens and meets up. I know we've got some people from Fair Housing Council and things like that. Being able to get this checklist into the court system too, so that again, when they're assigned reasonable accommodation, it matches what realistically and reasonably we can all do. So again, we're getting close to the end. We've got like 6 more minutes. I feel like I've been doing all the talking, clearly. But I want to thank everybody again for participating. Again, as I said at the beginning, the goal of doing this, and even the goal of the checklist when I first started, is to be able to affect positively the most amount of people. So being able to reach the most amount of people struggling with this issue. And that's individuals, family members, professionals. There's lots of training out there. There's lots of great training and conferences. There's lots of free information out there on the internet. At the same time, it's difficult to get everybody working from the same perspective and everybody on the same page. So by having people using the harm reduction approach, because as somebody mentioned earlier, mental health support through this is extremely, extremely important if somebody's going to be successful long term. That being said, most people that, if you're working for an agency like Adult Protective Services, code enforcement, the people that you're coming across with this issue are not ready for that. They're not wanting treatment at this point. So we need to be able to have, how do we manage this then? You know, do we wait for the town to get training? Do we wait till we find a professional to do this? Yes, do those things, but you don't have to wait. To be able to use this form, get everybody on the same page, use that harm reduction approach, which is compassionate, it's objective, which is key, and getting everybody on the same page. It's not just a tool for professionals. It's not just a tool for the individual. And somebody mentioned, which I hadn't thought of before, Lynn, actually from ClearPath, I don't know if you're here today, but mentioned giving it to family members. And I'm like, absolutely, we need everybody on the same page to actually make progress with this. So again, I want to thank everybody for attending. If you're watching this live, again, thank you very much for taking the time. I know a lot of you are at work and that was kind of a difficult issue. We have a lot of people that wanted to participate, but because they were at work, were unable to. So we're going to make this video available on our YouTube channel. Again, go to thecluttermovement.com. Free registration just gives you access to the most updated forms if there's ever any changes. And it also gives you a link to the YouTube channel. Now that won't be, the link is there right now, but it'll take me a little bit to get this uploaded. So you can go there and view this and any other things that we do live like this. If you have any questions from here on out, you can go back to this, you can type them in, or you can email me at marnie@thecluttermovement.com. You can always call me. My information is on there also. And again, thank you all very, very much for attending. It's been great. I look forward to working with you. A lot of you have called me on other cases to work with, and it's been great. So again, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day and email me if you have any further questions about this. Take care. Bye-bye.